I really love studying language because it's both really complicated but also very intuitive at the same time. So for example, you were probably taught about prefixes and suffixes in school. Prefixes modify a root word by appending something before it, and suffixes do the same at the end of the word. You were probably never taught about infixes, which modify a word by inserting into the middle of it. The reason you never learned about these is that you can only do them when cursing.
Tell us a little bit about the war, man.
War in Vietnam?
War in Viet-fucking-Nam!
You most often see this with the F word and its derivatives, but you can also use a small amount of other curses. Abso-bloody-lootly, alla-goddamn-bama, etc. Interestingly, you can't insert it anywhere into a word. Abso-freaking-lootly works, but ab-freaking-salutely or absolute-freakingly both don't. And you also can't do it with every word. Like, cata-frickin-lonia works fine, but Germa-frickin-knee or Scott-frickin-lend don't, at least for me. We all intuitively know a bunch of rules for when you can use this and when you can't, but most of us couldn't spell them out. We just get a gut feeling that it sounds right or wrong. No one's parents sat them down and was like, "Alright, Jimmy, today I'm going to teach you how to swear." But we all somehow arrived at more or less the same set of unspoken rules. I love learning about language because it feels like discovering a new part of yourself, things you've been doing your entire life but haven't realized. And the closer you look, the more you end up realizing you don't understand. Every part of language rests on layers of complexity beneath it. So let's start by looking at something you've probably thought about but don't have a name for. Pragmatics. How social context changed the meaning of a phrase. Here's a pretty normal conversation between two friends. "Hey, how are you doing?" "Oh, what's up, man? Did you see the game last night?" "Yeah, it was kind of a bummer." Now you notice both of them asked a question there, and neither of them responded to the other person's questions, but it still felt natural. That's because "how are you doing" and "what's up" are what is called phatic phrases. Phrases that ignore their literal meaning and instead take on a social meaning. In this case, it's a greeting. But let's say that this guy's father died, and this guy just heard about it. "Hey, how are you doing?" "Honestly, not great." Here, it's the same phrase, but it's not a greeting. Instead, it's an actual question about the other person's well-being. If you had to write down rules for when "how are you doing" is a greeting and when it's a question, it's pretty difficult. But we all more or less can pick it up, just in the social context. A fun example of this being misused comes from a Japanese kid that I knew. He was trying to learn English and was doing that by watching a lot of English YouTube videos. He noticed people on YouTube kept saying the same phrase before leaving and figured it was probably phatic and essentially just meant goodbye. So one day he was talking to some American relatives and decided to end the conversation with, "Be sure to like and subscribe." Now it's easy to hear that and laugh at how silly it is, but think about it. I ended my last video with, "I'll see you next time," but that's totally phatic. I'm not seeing you in any sense. I'm looking at a script while talking into a mic, and you're watching an animation in a totally different place and time than I recorded this. None of that is literally what those words mean. Now, once you've figured out the social context of a sentence, it's still not trivial by any means to know what a phrase means. The layer beneath pragmatics is semantics, how words form meaning. So for example, how do we define the word dog? One idea is that we build up a list of a bunch of traits in our head. Something like an animal with 4 legs that's fluffy and has a snout. Something that matches these traits is a dog, and anything that doesn't is not. We then tune this as we get more experience with the word. Bear matches all these traits, so maybe we add small to exclude bears. Chihuahuas barely have fur, so maybe we remove fluffy. You can add traits on top of this with adjectives. A green dog should have all the traits of a dog, plus the trait of being green. And we can modify core traits. A 3-legged dog means it's a dog even though it breaks our 4 legs rule. At some point this starts to get pretty complicated though. A robot dog is still a dog but is excluded from a bunch of the traits of dogs. It isn't alive, it isn't a mammal, it doesn't have fur. Yet despite all that, it passes some threshold of traits that it still makes sense to call it a dog. Or more confusing still are phrases like a fake dog. Somehow it has enough dog traits that we can use the word dog, but at the same time it breaks enough of those traits that we know it's not a real dog. And that meaning is flexible. I fed the fake dog makes it seem like it's a fox or something. while I polished the fake dog makes it sound like it's a statue of a dog. By stacking multiple adjectives on top of each other, you can end up with something that's totally different from the original word. Things like giant red cartoon dog. But in English, you can't just add adjectives however you want. Giant red cartoon dog is fine, but cartoon red giant dog is very weird. That brings us to the next layer, syntax, how the structure of words form phrases. Syntax tells us the role different words play in a sentence. So I can make up a new word, corpash, and use it in a sentence like, the dog is going to corpash the apple. The syntax of English tells us that the word in that position is a verb, so corpash is some kind of action that can be done to an apple. Now most people could explain verbs to you, but cartoon red giant dog is ungrammatical for a reason most native English speakers couldn't tell you, adjective order. English adjectives always need to be in a particular order based on what they mean. And this isn't just a general vibe, it's really specific. Adjectives always need to be in this exact order. Opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose. So I can say a huge ancient metallic pineapple, or the ugly square orange car, but I can't say something like the German young tall man. Now here's one that I think some of us will disagree on, the ancient Chinese red dragon. If you consume a lot of fantasy media like me, you might find it grammatical. But if you look, red is after Chinese, so doesn't that break the rule? If we switch to similar words, the ancient Swedish blue dog, it sounds totally wrong. To explain this, we need the next layer of linguistics, morphology, how sounds form words. I think what's going on here is that, for me, red dragon is an example of compounding, when two words combine to form a new one. Look at a word like greenhouse. It used to be two separate words, but over time it became its own thing, separate from a house that is also green. In media like Dungeons & Dragons, a red dragon is not just a dragon that is red. It usually implies a lot of other things, like it can breathe fire and it's probably evil. Because of that, saying things like a black-red dragon makes sense to me. It's an evil fire-breathing dragon, but it's black instead of the usual red. And this is one of the crazy things about studying language. It's constantly changing and different for each person. People who are into biology might call a dark gray-colored grizzly a black-brown bear, while other people might think that's totally ungrammatical to say. Morphology generally looks at how words are formed, asking questions like, why can you quicken something but not slowen something? The answer to that kind of question rests on an understanding of the final layer of linguistics, phonetics, how we use sounds. If you're like me and often go into big Wikipedia rabbit holes, you might have seen weird symbols like this or this. What's going on here? What are these? Well, these symbols are from what is called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. IPA has different symbols for each sound that humans can make in language. So I can say the sentence, I was talking to a guy from South Africa, and he kept getting mad when I called them zebras instead of zebras. But you can't really write that down and express it through text. You might try to do some weird spelling like this with two E's, or add some dashes, but it's hard to pick a fake spelling that everyone will read the same way. And that's where IPA comes in. You can spell it like this for zebra and this for zebra, and it removes the ambiguity. There's a different symbol for each of those vowel sounds. English has more vowel sounds than a lot of other languages, which causes people who learn it as a second language to have a lot of difficulty with this kind of thing.
Why is this one Kansas, but this one is not Arkansas?
Vowel sounds also change pretty often. Like in my dialect of English, this is a bagel, and this word are both pronounced cot. A lot of people who grow up only encountering English don't realize how terrible our writing system is for expressing this. Learning to read and write in English is an affair that takes children like a decade, while people speaking Korean or Spanish can just spend a couple of weeks learning all the shapes of characters. If you aren't yet convinced that the English writing system is terrible, here's a fun example. In the word enough, GH makes a f sound. In the word women, O makes a I sound. And in the word nation, TI makes a sh sound. So by that logic, you could write the word fish like this. Very fun. So those are all the components of language. Pragmatics, semantics, syntax, morphology, and phonetics. all of which have a ton of weird, hard-to-explain quirks that we expect every person to have totally mastered without any instruction before they can add 1 plus 1. All my examples here were for English, because that's the language this video is in, but every language has its own unique quirks and weirdness. Next time you see someone struggling to speak your language, I hope you can appreciate how incredibly difficult a task that really is. Thanks for watching. My unsolicited recommendation of the day is Contemporary Linguistics. I personally really like textbooks as a way to get started in a field you don't have any exposure to. I picked this book up on a whim in a college bookstore and enjoyed it so much I got a whole minor in the field. It has a lot of interesting anecdotes like the ones I used here, but also has a lot of serious theory that can be a basis if you want to explore any of this further. Thanks again, and I'll again end with "I'll see you later," but at this point we both know that's not true.